Welcome. It's nice to have you here. Today is our Relax into Health, Wealth, and Happiness meeting. And as usual, I will endeavor to explain what the purpose and value of this meeting is. I think that's important because you should know whether you're in the right place or not. So the name of the meeting is an attempt to describe it. So it is an opportunity and an invitation for you to relax into the truth of who you are. So health, wealth, and happiness are some pointers of that. So health and wealth, it turns out really, I think, have the same root, which is wholeness. And happiness here is maybe a catch-all for peace, joy, harmony, contentment, which is, we can say, the divine qualities of your true nature. So what does it mean to relax? It means that you don't have to try to get something, because the attempts to get something prevent you from getting it. Because there's an underlying assumption when we're trying to get something that we don't have it, or that it needs to be gotten, or that we're lacking something essential. And so all of the attempts to get it, to grasp it, to hold on to it, because they're founded on that assumption, there is an underlying anxiety, and so it works against us. We're assuming that there's a lack, but what it is that we want is wholeness. If you assume that there's a lack, you can't recognize the wholeness, because the wholeness, by definition, is lacking nothing. And so we have to relax into our wholeness and our intrinsic wellness, happiness, peace, contentment, joy, harmony. So that's the invitation. It's an invitation to really discover that. Of course, when we think, well, we'll think whatever we're going to think about that. So there'll be some idea about what it is that all of that means, and that turns out also to be an obstacle. It's inevitable that there will be some idea that we approach this with some assumptions about what it is that this health, wealth, and happiness is, and who we are, and what needs to be done, and what it means to relax, and what it will be like when we've got it. And all of that is based upon what we could call ignorance. So there's this ignorance is fundamentally just ignorance of your true nature, or of the nature of reality, what this is really all, what all of this really is. And so again, we have these mistaken ideas about who we are and what all of this is, and then we think necessarily that there's something that needs to be some condition that needs to be met before we can attain the health, wealth, and happiness that we desire. So again, maybe it's evident why that's problematic, because we're starting then from the assumption that there is a lack, or that there's a separation, or that there's some problem that needs to be overcome. And then we set about trying to do something, trying to fix something, which is going to involve either trying to get rid of something or trying to get something. And either getting rid of or trying to obtain, either one is founded upon this assumption of separation or lack. And so we find ourselves right back in the same trap again, which is that we're trying to do something to get what we already are. So this meeting is an opportunity to explore this because it's somewhat of a conundrum, it would appear, but there is a remedy, and that's what we explore here together. And so through this exploration and through learning this process of what I am calling active relaxation, then you learn how to uh, inhibit those bad habits, the bad habits of assumptions and grasping and efforting. And you learn how to accept and receive a higher intelligence than the intelligence that you normally identify with. So this is also, I'll now describe the same problem that I've already described, but I'll describe it in a different way, which is that we have the same trap that we fall into because we identify with this limitation. So we say, I am this one. And however we define that in the moment, and that definition is usually very largely subconscious and unconscious, and to a lesser degree conscious. But we have this set of identifications that we think I am this one. I have these needs. I have these special things about me. And so this all needs to be protected and defended and proclaimed and all of these various things. And then we simultaneously have this recognition that we want peace. We know that we're not, we know that we struggle with all the things that we struggle with. We know that there's what we could broadly categorize as suffering. If you don't like that word, you can substitute a different word, whatever word you prefer. But suffering, I think, is a good catch-all just to describe the anxiety and the misidentification and the compulsions to protect and defend and obtain and all of that. So I would just call all of that as suffering. So we know on some level that we're suffering, and we know that we want peace. We know that we want to finally be free of that suffering. But then the difficulty is, and again, I'm describing the same trap that I've already described, but the difficulty is then that we want to have that peace and freedom while holding on to the limitation, while holding on to the limited and false identifications and all the conditionality, all of the things where we say, I've got all of these conditions that need to be met so that I can be safe and I can be happy and I can be free as I presently identify myself. And so you just see there's all kinds of conditions for that. And you think, well, I can be happy when, and fill in the blank, all the things that the conditions you think need to be met. You know, when that person respects me and when that other person behaves in the ways that I think are good, and when that person finally realizes that they need to forgive me, and when that other person stops treating me like a jerk, and when all the whole world is populated by people who are very intelligent and kind and loving and considerate, and nobody ever steps on anybody's toes, and nobody insults anybody, and all whatever, and whatever the conditions are. But all of that is founded upon this central character to the whole narrative, and it's you, or you think is you, which is just defined by all of these assumptions and conditions. And so we, on the one hand, we know that we desperately want peace and freedom. And on the other hand, we think that we need to get that peace and freedom for this person that we identify as. But this is the trap again, because we're starting from an assumption of limitation and separation. This conditional individual, the one who has all these special needs, that has all these conditions for peace and freedom, by definition, it's separate and lacking. It's not the whole, and by definition, it's very conditional. So anything that can be obtained by it is going to be limited and conditional. And so we can get limited and conditional peace and freedom, which is to say no peace or freedom at all. Because you've probably noticed that you get degrees of what you consider to be peace and freedom, but then they can be lost when the conditions change. So they're conditional. When the conditions are such that you don't feel impinged upon, then you say, oh, I'm experiencing peace and freedom. But then the conditions change and suddenly you feel, oh no, there's they're out to get me, or it's not safe, or I'm whatever. The conditions have changed, and so you're experiencing your conditionality, that you are identified in a conditional and limited way. So we tend to play that game a lot, and at various levels, and it continues in degrees. But overall, as we mature, and maturity happens whenever it does. I mean, some people mature when they're mature when they're born. That's rare, but that does happen. And then there are others who they die, age 120, and they still haven't matured. So maturation process is a process of, we'll say it's a soul level process. It's not really a human level process. Well, it can trickle down to the human level, but it's not a fundamentally human process. But this maturation, as it occurs, the natural realization is, and this may be conscious or it may be subconscious, but there will be this realization on some level that, when I have all of these conditions, then my peace and freedom that I so desperately want is also conditional. And no matter how much control I have over the conditions, I never seem to have enough control, because there's always something that's outside of that control, outside of the scope of my identification. And so there's always still this lingering sense of lack and separation. And that always results sooner or later in this anxiety and distress that interferes with my experience of the peace and freedom that I want. And I actually realize, as this maturation occurs, that I want the peace and freedom more than I want anything else. More than I want the pleasures, and more than I want the sense of power, and more than I want all of that stuff. It isn't all, and none of that stuff isn't wrong or bad. It's not that we necessarily have to get rid of all of that. That's that's maybe a common misunderstanding, is that we have to get rid of power and pleasure in order to fully realize the peace and freedom that we really want. And it's not true, but what is true is that we have to get our priorities straight. We have to have this recognition that I want the peace and freedom first and foremost, more than anything. It's like in the New Testament, when I think it's in the New Testament, when it's something about, first seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, and all else will be added. It's something to that nature, right? That it's not that everything else has to be forever rejected, but it's seek ye first the kingdom of heaven. First, you want the peace and freedom. That peace and freedom has to be the foundation. I mean, again, another New Testament quote is that, well, I'll paraphrase, but be like the man who builds his house upon the stone, not like the man who builds his house on the sand, right? So it's the same sort of notion. If you don't have your priorities straight, if you're seeking first the pleasure and the power, then you're like the man building his house on sand, and it's conditional. And so when the conditions change, your foundation is gone, and your house can't stand if there's no foundation. But when you have your priorities straight, and there's this maturation that occurs, and you realize first and foremost, peace and freedom. More than anything else, I need this peace and freedom. And I need it to be true and lasting and unconditional. Then you're like the man building his house on the stone, because it's unchanging. So that's this awakening of intelligence. And I suppose you can't really do that, but you can open to it. And the fact that you're here means that you are open to it. So you're doing, or what's needed is being done through you presently, by you being here and receptive to that truth. If you can look and recognize that in yourself, then that's grace operating through you. So then this virtuous cycle starts when you have this recognition, when you can look and you can see, yes, peace and freedom, unconditional peace and freedom, first and foremost, that is what I need. Must be my number one priority. All the rest of it is secondary. Only unconditional peace and freedom. When you can recognize that, then this virtuous cycle has begun, because that's the foundation of the virtue. And so then you can continue this process, this virtuous cycle, by having gratitude and humility. So just take a look right now and notice that you're not doing any of this. That all of this is happening, all of it's being done by this higher intelligence, not by the limited intelligence that you've identified with. So when you think of yourself and you think of your name and your life story and this body and all the things that your body and mind do and have done and might possibly do, that's fine. That gets to happen. There's not a problem with that, but just notice that that's by definition limited. And so this person, this personality, this mind, this body is clearly not doing everything, right? This one is not shining the sun. This one is not beating all of the hearts. In fact, this one's not even beating its own heart, right? This one's heart is being beat. This one is not even thinking its own thoughts. Its thoughts are being thought. So there can be this humility, this possibility of recognizing that this limited identification, this limited one that you've identified with, isn't really doing any of it. But there's a higher intelligence which is doing it all. And then you can actually acknowledge this higher intelligence is not just higher, it's supreme, it's unimaginable, because it's doing everything, even what you are not even aware of. I mean, there's so much that you don't even, you think about that you have a sort of scope of your conscious awareness, right? There are things that you can be consciously aware of. And then there are things just on the periphery of that that you can be consciously aware of, but you're not normally consciously aware of, right? Like you're not normally consciously aware of your heart, but you can become consciously aware of your heart beating. So it's on the periphery. And that can be expanded through practice, through attention. But the main point here is just to notice that there's this conscious awareness, and it has a sort of porous boundary, right? That you can expand it and become more aware of things. But then there's that which is so far beyond your conscious awareness that you don't even know that is there. And you can see that there's like the things that you don't, most people are not going to have conscious awareness of cellular activity, right? You can become aware of certain organs, right? Like the heart, the lungs, maybe. But through this expansion of conscious awareness, but then there are aspects of yourself that you know are there, but you can't actually become consciously aware of them. You know that there's cellular activity. You know that that's happening. But try as you might, you can't actually consciously be aware of it. I suppose that this would be like a yogic superpower that could be developed if that was one's path in life. It's probably not yours. Maybe it is, but it's probably not, because it would be fairly rare. So that capacity exists latently, but for the vast majority of us, that's not going to happen. We're not going to become consciously aware of cellular activity, and that's great. Who needs to? I don't. You don't. It's not necessary. But the point here is just that this is beyond the periphery of your conscious awareness so much that you can't actually bring it into your field of conscious awareness, but it's just far enough outside that you have knowledge of its existence. Hopefully that makes sense. But then notice that there's that which is even beyond, so that it's there, but you don't even know of its existence. And that's infinite. There's no limit to this reality. It expands in every direction infinitely, in every dimension infinitely, right? It's not just in 3 dimensions, it's time, space, so that's 4 dimensions, and then there's other dimensions that you can't even comprehend because they're so far beyond your present mental faculties that they you can't even imagine them, but they exist. So this is all and the point here again is in each dimension it goes infinitely, right? So take just a single dimension of space, right? So just this axis, this forward and back axis. Where is the end of it? There's no end. It goes infinitely forward and infinitely backward. And that's just one dimension. Then side to side, infinitely side to side, infinitely up and down. And then again, time, infinite in either direction, however you conceive of it, right? So every dimension, this intelligence is operating everything, producing, creating, sustaining, transforming everything infinitely in all dimensions. So perhaps we can cultivate a little bit of humility to recognize, wow, this infinite intelligence, this supreme intelligence that is doing everything infinitely in all dimensions, it's quite a lot, quite a bit more than my limited ideas of myself. Say infinitely more, right? So notice then the normal way that you probably, if you're like most people, the way you normally conduct yourself is you're identified as this limited person and you are very concerned about managing your life. And that produces a lot of anxiety and distress, relatively more or less, depending on the person and depending on where you are in your process of evolution, right? Because you can probably see that there was some time when you experienced more or less anxiety, hopefully less. Hopefully you're evolving in a way in which you're experiencing more surrender, more peace. And so there's less anxiety, less distress because there's less conditionality, less expectation, more openness. But you can see there's a change, at least for better or for worse, there's a change. So um, so that's changing, but then this infinite supreme intelligence is always infinite and supreme. So no matter how contracted or expansive your limited sense of yourself might be, this supreme intelligence is always supreme. It's always superior to your intelligence as a separate identification. Now, as I was saying, as this maturation process occurs, there can be this realization of I want this peace and freedom more than anything else. And so hopefully that has occurred for you. And when this occurs for you, as I say, this is the beginning of a virtuous cycle, and you can participate actively in this virtuous cycle by recognizing that recognizing and acknowledging this supreme intelligence that is infinitely doing everything, always, everywhere, perfectly. Now, you at the moment I say perfectly, of course, the limited intelligence is, wait a second, I don't know about perfectly. What does that mean? I'm not so sure it's so perfect because I'm not so sure I like all of it. But see, this supreme intelligence is so vastly beyond the limitations of the conditional identity that its perfection is incomprehensible to the conditional limited identification. That's how it's totally different order of reality. So this humility, which is very, very helpful, essential for the encouragement of this virtuous cycle, is just to keep acknowledging that this supreme intelligence exists and that it is superior to your limited conditional identity. You don't even have to, if you take that very personally, like, oh, wait a second, I think I'm pretty all right. I think I'm pretty good. I think I'm doing all right in life. I'm a pretty good person. I'm a pretty nice person, pretty intelligent person. I'm not so sure I like this business about a superior intelligence. I'm gonna just again see it's not a personal thing. It's not like there's anything wrong with you. It's just to acknowledge the facts that by definition, this limited identity does not have access, at least not in the direct sense, to the infinite intelligence of that infinite intelligence. It's not personal. It doesn't mean anything bad about you. It's just an intelligent thing to acknowledge this fact. And so this helps to encourage this virtuous cycle. And then very helpful also is gratitude. So to recognize that I've been, sort of bungling along, mismanaging things, doing my best, but really in the big picture, not so great, right? I've been sort of clumsy at best. And so if I was trying to do this by myself, if I was trying to evolve by myself, if I was trying to actually find peace and freedom, unconditional peace and freedom on my own, that would be a very difficult, possibly impossible, but at the very least, a very long process. And somehow what has happened is that there's been an intervention that has occurred that has produced this realization, that has produced this maturation, this recognition that I want peace and freedom more than I want anything else. Because see, look, if that had not occurred, then what? You'd just still be seeking after the same things that won't give you what you really want. So this intervention has occurred. It is an intervention. It's coming from outside of your limited idea of yourself. Because your limited idea of yourself doesn't even know of anything outside of itself, or at least it didn't until this intervention occurs. And then there's this realization, wait a second, there's something outside of me, something superior to me. Who knew? And so this is classically described as this limited sense of self is called an egoic self, right? And it gets a bad rap in certain circles. And there's this idea you got to kill the ego and all kinds of violent notions. But that's very difficult. And I'm not so sure that it's even likely to be successful. Even if it was, I'm not sure that it would be particularly desirable, at least not reliably desirable. So maybe we could just dispatch with that, but just maybe there's this possibility of an acknowledgement, a recognition from within the egoic structure, like a light has shone in. Up to that moment, there was this shell that is the egoic structure, and you were as if living within it in darkness and ignorance, not knowing of the existence of anything outside of it, thinking this is all there is. And then this moment of divine intervention where there's a little hole poked in it and the light comes in and there's this realization, holy cow, there's something outside of this. So gratitude is very helpful. So you can think about it, like an egg. So you're like the creature inside the egg, like an embryo, right? That is developing inside the egg. And so this structure, the egg structure, is not bad. It's not evil. It's necessary. because life is saying, I want to create here. I want to create something here. I want to know myself in this way. And so it's creating it, and it puts this protective shell around it, because if there's no protective shell, then there's nothing that will allow for the development of this creation, because it will just forever just be merged with the totality. So there has to be something that says, this is something distinct. So the shell, the egoic structure does that. It's not bad. So you're like this embryo developing in the shell, and it's very good that the shell is not pierced until it is, because if it was, then that would be the end of you as this potential for a self-aware manifestation. See, the supreme intelligence is always supreme. It's never not. It's never, it always is. It's beyond, I mean, it's beyond language. It's beyond space and beyond time. So you can't really understand it or describe it properly, but the best we can do is just say it always is, right? So there's no, it doesn't, it's always complete. It has no need, but there's a desire. It's a desire to know itself through this creation. And so there's this potential within you to know yourself as you are. And that's the desire. That seed has been planted there, this desire, which is to be something, right? Because the supreme intelligence is nothing. It's not a thing. It's a desire to be something and to know yourself. Think about how incredible that is. We take it so for granted because we didn't do it. It was, we just showed up and here it all was. It was just given to us. So we take it for granted. So there's a lack of gratitude, which is fine, because it couldn't have been otherwise. But I'm just pointing out that this is a natural process that we can awaken to, and rather than being in resistance to it, rather than complaining about it, rather than arguing with it, rather than saying, this shouldn't be like this, and if there's a God, why would God create suffering, and why would yada 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 yada, to recognize, wait a second, that's all coming from this limited intelligence, which is very ungrateful, which doesn't really know anything to speak of, and which is just experiencing a lot of self-induced suffering. But there's this divine intervention which is occurring presently, which is this awareness that is revealing that there is something beyond this limited structure that I've only known up to this point. And if I open to that, then it will fulfill its own desire, which is, seek ye first the kingdom of heaven and all else will be added unto you. It's not like seek ye first the kingdom of heaven and then suffer misery for the rest of your life, endure endless torture. That's not, no. Seek ye first the kingdom of heaven and all else will be added unto you. Like all that is the essence of the desire, not the objects of desire, not the pursuit of desire, but the essence of the desire, the fulfillment, the bliss itself, that will be given to you, because it will emerge through you, because that's what this desire is to be something and know yourself. So you've developed inside of this egg of this egoic structure, and now this magnificent moment has occurred, this divine intervention, the piercing and the recognition there's something beyond it. And then now there's a relationship that's occurring, and the the promise of the fulfillment of this, of cultivating this relationship, is the a recognition, I am that, right? This is the promise. And all the all the scriptures say this. That's the promise, that's the fulfillment, to have the direct realization that I am that. So, but this initially, because there's a sense I am this separate thing, and then there's a recognition there's something greater than this that I think I am. So there's a sense of relationship, I and thou. Before there's I am that, there's I and that. And how can that come full circle so that there can be an incarnated self-awareness, is through the cultivation of that relationship so that it blossoms. And so gratitude is very helpful. You can check all of the negative tendencies, right? All of the tendencies toward ingratitude and arrogance, which we all have. I mean, some of us more than others. Someday we could try to compare and see who's got more, but it doesn't really matter. We've got, we've all got some degree of these things, because that had to be there. That has to be there again as part of this protective shell. But you can't stay in the shell forever. You won't. So there's this emergence that's occurring, and that's this virtuous cycle. And so now you've got to also play your part. Do what you are called to do by cultivating this relationship. Gratitude is enormously helpful. So acknowledgement is fundamental. If you can't acknowledge this higher intelligence, how can you cultivate a relationship with it? So first of all, acknowledging it, like I've pointed out, and you can find your own ways, but just to find that acknowledgement that yes, there is this higher intelligence, and it is supreme. It is doing everything. And then to cultivate that through gratitude, just to notice these tendencies toward ingratitude, and then just to tell a deeper truth, which is, but wait a second, I don't know that that's true, right? So you can observe all of your limited beliefs. And this is a process. It's not something that's going to happen just like that. It's a process. So you have to commit to it. It's very well worth it. So you just start to observe your limited beliefs, which are all based on ignorance and conditions and limitation. And they all result in ingratitude and fear. And then you want to release those and tell a deeper truth and start to acknowledge that actually you had it. There was a misunderstanding. So I can't know all of your beliefs, obviously. So I can't give you a list of all of them right now, but I can give you an example. So this will make sense, hopefully. So as an example, use this example that I already mentioned. Well, if there's a God, why would God create suffering? Okay, so there's a belief there that there is this thing called suffering, and it's bad, and God created it, and it's only harmful to me, and so it's just this bad situation. That's the belief. So then to recognize, well, wait a second. When I believe that, what's my experience? Oh, wow, that hurts. It's just really painful. So to believe in that way. Now, how do I know that it's true? Well, I don't know it's true, actually. All I know is that I believe it. I can acknowledge I have that belief. I've been living as though it was true. I've been behaving as though it was true. When I have that belief and I believe in it, I behave very badly. I hurt myself. I tense up. I indulge anger. I resist, struggle, induce depression, behave in unkind, impatient ways, view others with hostility and paranoia, and 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 uh, and attempt to cut myself off from the divine. So I can see, well, that's really painful. That's very self harmful. So I can see that when I believe that, I behave badly, hurt myself, experience a lot of pain and suffering, but I don't actually know that it's true. All I really know is that I just am in the habit of believing it and acting out in that way. And again, this takes a lot of humility, because otherwise the tendency is just to cling to the thing, to say, well, I know it's true because I know it's true because I know it's true. It takes a lot of humility to tell the deeper truth and acknowledge, well, I don't really know it's true, actually. I just think it's true. I don't really know it's true. I just know that I'm hurting, and I know that I'm believing that it's somebody else's fault, and life's just unfair. But when I can see, well, I don't actually know that it's true, then I can say, well, okay, so since I don't know it's true, and I can see that when I believe it's true, I behave in these ways that are very harmful to myself, and I feel bad, and I don't like that. What might I do differently? Is there a choice available to me? And then perhaps it becomes apparent, yes, there is a choice, which I think I talked about, maybe it was last week, self-care, right? Just, I could I could choose to care for myself. So when I can see that I do these things that are harmful to myself because I tense up and I indulge anger and impatience and resistance and all that, I could just start to be more and more aware of when I'm doing those things, and I could choose to stop doing them. And I could start to notice that every time I'm doing those things, I'm repeating this same belief to justify those behaviors. And so I could start to actually choose to let go of that belief. Maybe even start to acknowledge a deeper truth, which is every time this occurs, I could just instead turn to this acknowledgement that there is a supreme intelligence which is doing everything. And surely this supreme intelligence is vastly greater than my limited intelligence, and I have been wrong many times, and so I'm almost certainly wrong about my negative beliefs now. And so you can do it however you want. I think prayer is very helpful. Just say, please, divine, please open me to surrender to, to surrender to unconditional love. Please support me in receiving your light, your truth, your peace. Please grant me freedom from my own self-torture. Please grant me greater self-awareness so that I can recognize all of the self-harm behaviors, and so that I can stop doing them, so that I can continue to grow into my true potential as an expression of divine being. So This is what's possible. You could just do that. And then just be willing to let go of the expectations, because the expectations will be, well, if I do this, then I should get that. Right. If I pause for a moment and I acknowledge and I'm humble and I ask for help, and if I choose to relax instead of getting all uptight, and if I choose to let go of that negative belief, then by golly, I should feel really good right now and forever. And if I don't, well, then I'll just go right back to my old way, and I'll just insist that there's no God, or that God is evil, or whatever, and continue with my own self-harm. So you have to drop the expectation again, because you have to acknowledge this higher intelligence is vastly more intelligent than I am. So it knows it has created me. It is me. Why would it? It absolutely would not do anything of the sort that I believe it has done. It wouldn't harm me. It has, because it is its own nature to have free will. It has, and is expressing through and as me. By golly, I've got free will, so I can choose self-harm, but I can also choose to cultivate this virtuous cycle by cultivating this relationship with the divine in a positive way. And so this is one way to understand active relaxation, is this process of acknowledgement, humility, gratitude. Say thank you for this life. Thank you for this moment. Thank you for this maturation. Thank you for this intervention. Thank you for this awareness. Thank you for this opportunity to choose love in this moment, because that's happening, right? It's like in this moment, there's this possibility of choosing unconditional love. Just say thank you. Just choose it. So there's so much more that could be said. I mean, there's so much more that in different moments we need to take hold of different perspectives and knowledge and different tools that are given to us to help ourselves. But we're at an hour, so that's very good for today. I think probably one of the most important things. This will do this will do for you what you cannot do for yourself. If you are willing just to surrender to this higher intelligence, if you're willing just to invite it to do for you what you can't on your own, because you have identified as a limited thing, and to acknowledge that it is infinitely intelligent, infinitely creative. And even though this word is a challenging one, and maybe it's not quite right, but whatever, it's I'll say it anyway. It's also good. If we can open to that, if we can open to its essential goodness, then, and not because you believe it, because you don't, because it's very difficult to believe it fully, but rather just as, because there's an intuitive opening, because this intelligence is coming through and saying, I am good. Not because it's self-serving to to say I am good, but because it serves you, because it will help you. And so just if you can also be willing to accept and acknowledge and receive that, just this will do everything if you will, if you allow it, and just keep allowing it. And you'll see that so many challenges will come up, but those challenges are always your own limitations. They're always the um, limited conditions that you have identified with as part of this egoic structure, and you are evolving beyond that. Because again, you can't live inside the shell forever. It's very painful to do so. And it's impossible and painful to attempt it. So this intelligence is functioning perfectly by producing that experience of discomfort, because that's part of the process of its own evolution. Is wow, there's this limitation. It's uncomfortable. It's an invitation to open to that higher intelligence, which is beyond that limitation, and allow it to lift you beyond that, or expand you beyond that, or however you want to understand it. So that's it from me today. At least formally, I'm happy to stay on for Q&A if there are any questions afterward, but as for the formal portion of the meeting, that's it. So I'm going to end this recording now.